Well, greetings and welcome back, fellow audio enthusiasts. It is I, Jason, of Two Channel Listening. Now, this episode is going to be an introduction into Harbeth to the Two Channel Listening take. What does that mean? That pretty much just means my brand of very subjective, unscientific opinion. Now, first and foremost, let me just say to my uniquely budget-capped viewers, I never forget where I came from, and I am always cognizant of my own audio journey and how I started out with a pair of hand-me-down Polk audio monitor speakers powered by a Fisher receiver I had acquired from a yard sale. So please understand that as I review these upper echelon products, you can still count on my unvarnished opinion. Now, so why Harbeth and why now? Well, unabashedly, I'm an opportunist. First and foremost, I love variety. I like getting a large sample size of all the different audio products out there because they each have their own unique little properties. And at the end of the day, I love a good audio bargain. Come on, that's what my channel is all about. So, my M30 story. How did I get to acquiring these? Well, that starts back with a former colleague was at a client's home, and the client was asking if our company at that time would take trade-ins and if they repurchase hi-fi gear. They do not, and so my counterparts basically gave him my phone number and said, hey, we have a hi-fi guy on staff who might be interested in buying your products. I get this text. It basically shows a picture of a balanced audio technology VK55 SE tube amp. Well, hello, you got my attention. I've had balanced audio technology equipment in the past, and I found that I really do find their sonic signature agreeable. And so absolutely I would love to play with a tube amp. So I said, go ahead and send me everything that he wants to sell, and we'll discuss it. So I get the list. It is the aforementioned amp. It is the balanced audio matching preamp, the VK3iX. It is the Ayre audio 5CE SACD player, and it is also these M30s. Now, I'm completely candid with you guys all the time. Of those 4 items, the matching stands, cables, everything, I already know this is way beyond my budget and what I could expect to purchase. And so, like any audiophile, I'm going to prioritize on the list. Number 1 I want is the VK amp. Number 2, I would take the preamp. Number 3 would be the M30s. And number 4 would be the Ayre SACD player, just because I already had a Denon SACD player. And why would I want another one that's usually well outside of my budget? So I call my buddy Dave up at Authentic Audio, say, Dave, I need your help going to audition this product. We show up at the fine retired gentleman's house, a very gracious Mr. Mark, and he points to his hallway. It says, the gear's in there. Open the door, and it's been sitting there for 10 years. Yes, it has been. The layers of dust. Wow. So Dave and I, we pick up the equipment, we spread it out on this gentleman's very large, very nice kitchen islands, and we get to cleaning everything off, start hooking everything up. Mark was gracious enough to have a nice stack of SACDs sitting there. I see Stravinsky's Firebird Suite. Let's plop that sucker in there. I stand back in what is not the best of demoing situations, and I give a good 5-minute listen to this system, the balanced audio technology, the Harbeth, and I look at Dave. And Dave knows in that moment, with that look, there is no way I am leaving this house without this gear. Mark was awesome. Mark made me an offer not only I could afford, I could not refuse. It is going to be one of the highlight purchases of the next decade for me to get all of these pieces at the prices that I did. And it just basically boils down to that Mark at that time was just tired of moving around all the heavy gear and doing all the different setups and just the fastidiousness that it can be the hi-fi world and enjoying two-channel audio. So win-win for me. I get the product home, I get the speakers home, and I throw everything into my system, put the M30s on their stands next to my Avalon Acoustics Radians and the Dali 2C active speakers. Cue up Melody Gardot, live in Europe, Wayfaring Soldier. What? Hello, what is that I'm hearing here? That voice, her voice through these speakers, the warmth, the texture, the naturalness. I have not heard that anywhere near as close from the Radians. I had definitely not heard that from the Dali Rubicon 2Cs. What is that? And I want a whole lot more of it, please. Very interesting. I've heard hundreds of speakers. There is something about the sonic signature of these 2007 speakers, and I needed to know more. I wanted to understand what made these sound so natural with just that first track. As a matter of fact, when I think of all the different speakers that I've owned, I feel they're more closely related to the Tecton Arus with that 10-inch eminence driver, and more importantly, one of my favorite speakers from the past, my upgraded Zoo Audio Omen Defs. They had the 3-inch compression driver. I know that if Alan Shaw gets wind of this and he ever figures out what my user handle is on the Hug group, I'll probably get kicked off post haste. But nevertheless, to understand the voicing of these M30s in 2007, one must go back to the origins, and that is Dudley Harwood. Well, Dudley Harwood is also the engineer at the BBC in the 1970s, working with a Spencer Hughes. Okay, well, the talent between those two alone in what they mean to the audiophile world cannot be explained in just a simple few minutes. There's just so much information, so much to go back to and scratch at that we just absolutely do not have the time. Nevertheless, the BBC at that time, they're looking to pour some money into producing a smaller compact speaker that can be used with their mobile vans and do what the BBC does best, their state-owned programming. So at that time, Spencer and Dudley, they're in the R&D side looking at different materials that can improve upon the mid-woofer driver of their licensed products. Now, one must understand at the 70s, prior to the 60s, most woofers, most mid-range drivers, they are of a paper material. Now, paper material, while it's very warm and can sound very good at specific frequencies, it distorts easy, it's too flexible, it's not stiff enough, it breaks up, there's power handling issues, on and on and on and on and on. And so how the engineers of those days, with the materials that were available to them at that time, all they could do was hand apply a doping material, some type of what would be considered, I guess, latex material, very rubberish. Well, they would apply that to be able to increase the power handling and the frequency response of the woofers and the mid-woofers. Well, there's other issues with that. As you keep adding dope to those cones, you're adding mass, you're adding weight, and the speakers would get would get less and less and less efficient. And then the crossovers would have to be even more complex to make up the difference, more power handling, on and on and on and on and on. So, that's the nuts and bolts of it. The BBC said okay to the project for Mr. Dudley to start looking into other products. Well, long story short, Dudley Harwood is known as the father of the polypropylene cone. The polypropylene cone, that is, that's pretty much the standard bearer for the last several decades of what's used in so many speakers for its ability to handle more power, its resolving power, on and on and on and on and on. So at that time, 1977, Dudley Harwood and his wife Elizabeth decide to come up with the name Harbeth, and they start their own speaker company. Also in 1977, Mr. Dudley Harwood launches the HL Monitor speakers and starts licensing those from the BBC. Here is an incredible fact. Something I don't know, even in the years and all the brands that I've researched, one is always astonished at such new and enlightening tidbits of the history of particular products. What struck me and what made total sense once I heard this factoid with the voicing and why melody was amazing with the M30s is that the straight arrow that Dudley Harwood is as an engineer and a science-first guy, he did not spend time in R&D'ing his products and evaluating his products with instruments, with musical instruments, with orchestra. So in the 70s, no, there was no classical, say, Ralph Williams being played through the Harbeth speakers and adjusting the crossover accordingly. There certainly, hell no, was no Rolling Stones being played on these speakers at that time. No. That straight edge, that straight arrow that Mr. Dudley Harwood is, would only play back his wife's voice. That's it. In his mind, and the research behind it is that from an evolutionary standpoint, our ears are completely fine-tuned to the human voice. All the nuance that is the human voice. Years and years and years and years and years and years of being used to picking out our family members, understanding distress calls. Our voices and our ears, they know what the natural sound is. They understand how to differentiate mood, tone, inflection. And with that, what better way to voice a speaker than to basically focus just on how well it reproduces the human voice. Wow, it's quite simple, but that's also something that 95% of the other speaker manufacturers out there don't do. You can even go back to the 1970s with acoustic research and what it was doing to promote and market the AR3s, where they would have a live symphony sitting there and then they would play the symphony through the AR3 speakers. That was back in the 70s, if I remember correctly. And so, wow, that strict engineering mindset for all those years that Harwood manufactured Harbeth, it only had to do with the human voice. Interesting. Now, I'm not going to get into the Alan Shaw story today. I'm not going to get into the Alan Shaw philosophy. That's way too much to unpack. Well, let's just start talking about my impressions now of the M30 while I've had them in two different rooms, my large 14 by 24 room in Idaho, and now this very small 1,400 cubic foot listening space dedicated to my 2-channel audio. First, let me say from I'm going to call it a weakness. These are picky speakers. They're very picky when it comes to room boundaries and room placement. You have to get that right. The toe-in has to be right. Forget the fact that you want the tweeter right at your ear within at least a centimeter. I got that dialed in. The toe-in is very important for those first reflections. The room modes, I'm working through all of that, but these are tough speakers for this small room. And so, it was interesting with the types of tracks that I would play and what sounded really good to me and what didn't sound so good to me. And then again, the equipment synergy is very important with these speakers, I would say in a smaller room. So with me is my Peachtree combination, the M220, 220 watt Class D amp, the preamp, the Nova Pre. I have the Bat Gear, which is the VK3iX. I have the VK55SE, and I also have my Audio Research VT Mark III, 100 watt tube amp. Beautiful, awesome amplifier that is. Sound impressions. What are the strengths? So I complained about a particular genre with my Radian acoustics, or my acoustics, Avalon Acoustics Radians. I did not enjoy listening to rock. I did not enjoy listening to hard rock. I did not enjoy listening to Buckethead. I did not enjoy listening to my prog rock with the Avalon Acoustics. They were too incisive, too clinical, and they just took a lot of the fun out of a lot of my favorite genre. These M30s made progressive rock great again. I was able to really spend a lot of time with my favorite power trio from Canada and dive back into why I love permanent waves so much. Jacob's Ladder, and just listening to the team and then moving on to moving pictures. When I played Camera Eye multiple times, I was struck by the unique characteristics of Neil Peart's drum kit. Now, again, it's not about total dB, it's not about total output, but there was a delineation and a space around Neil's drum kit, and the way it sounded was strong. And it's funny because the optimum playback for me was an average of the high 70s with the peaks around 85 dB, nothing above that. It didn't sound right on the M30s. So staying within that realm of volume, there was an absolute strength hearing Neil Peart's drum kit and how clean and distinct each of the drum heads were. And another thing it brought back that I didn't realize I missed it until I heard it was the shimmer, the decay and the shimmer was missing from so many other speakers that I had been listening to prior, even in my much larger room. Matter of fact, the Q Acoustic 400A active speakers had no shimmer, but I'm not reviewing those speakers. Nevertheless, I will say that Geddy's bass guitar was overblown on a lot of tracks, but at that, playing back at the high 70 dB, I was good with it. It sounded right. The guitars, Lifeson, no complaints about his guitar riffs whatsoever through the M30s. And again, I could go on and on and on about anything that had to do with voice. If you love vocal jazz, well, this is your kit right here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about how amazing all the different voices are, especially women's voice. When you understand the history of what Dudley Harwood did, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time understanding why women's voice in particular is so luscious, so natural, so warm, and it's intoxicating. You're just going to fall in love with the Harbeth sound from that perspective. There are other things that didn't do too well, and depending on room mode, Again, there's a lower mid-bass bump that could get kind of tedious, at least it did for me. However, because of their, I'll say, I won't say darker nature, but their more polite nature, I dove into a whole lot of old movie scores as well. I'm talking about the 1980s blockbusters. I queued up Aliens, I queued up Blade Runner, Conan the Barbarian, I queued up Terminator. Talk about transportation device. What a time machine. Listening to those tracks and that eerie buildup, those climactic scenes. These played from wall to wall, filled the entire sound stage, heard the different instrumentation, heard the space around the instruments, and it was just a joy to hear a lot of those old 80s tracks from my favorite films. Now, fast forward, let's do some Hans Zimmer. Let's go to Batman, the track like a dog chasing a car. These speakers, while on paper, the M30s start rolling off at 50. However, at the right playback levels, you're hearing bass notes in the 30 hertz region. Yes, it doesn't have quite the power. Yes, it's not as forceful as a lot of people would want, and that's what subwoofers are for. However, the notes were there, and it added to what you could only say is the resolving power of these speakers with that radial 8-inch woofer. Seriously impressive. It goes, and I should also say that while Dudley Harwood and Mr. Alan Shaw came up with some great material for these mid-woofers, they do source the tweeters and have for many, many years from Ciaz, and in this speaker it is the Ciaz tweeter from the Excel line. A fantastic tweeter, not a cheap tweeter, very high quality metal dome tweeter. What differentiates I'm not going to get into it in this episode of what differentiates the anniversary editions, the first M30s, the 25th model, the 30th model, the 35th, the 40th, the 30.1 and the 30.2. There's a philosopher from Shaw. I don't want to get into that. There's too, like I said, there's too much to unpack there, and I might get myself into trouble. However, I don't buy the speakers. I didn't buy my HL Compact 7ES3s because of Alan Shaw's philosophy. I bought them because I know that they're the more modern version and they're supposed to play flatter and be more room friendly compared to the M30s. I will get into that on a third episode. Having bought those Compact 7s from the Music Room in Ayre, Colorado, my good friends over there have worked out with me and loaned me the matching Cherry P3 ESRs, XDs, extended definition, and the Super HL5 Pluses, the extended definition series, mind you. So I have 3 XDs on hand to duke it out against the 2007 model 30th anniversary here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle the P3s next, discuss their strengths and weaknesses, and how do they measure up against the M30. Last but not least, I cannot say who the M30 is perfect for, the 30.1, the 30.2. Again, I can only tell you that it was a bit persnickety like a zoo speaker with room placement, getting it right, the toe-in right, and having the appropriate amount of acoustic material, damping material within your room to handle those low-frequency bumps, as well as having synergy. The Peachtree was too much of a good thing. That Class D amp, it does what it does. It likes to really accentuate lower registers with speakers, and that was too much syrup. That was just too much sugar. The Arc, expecting that to have all the resolving power I would want, it did. However, I found that the balanced audio technology VK55SE shaved just enough off of the lower register power. It shaved just enough off that it smoothed it out and it gave a better balanced presentation within my listening space. And so I did the vast majority of my listening with the balanced audio technology combination. It just, Mark had figured out long ago when he bought these speakers that there was something about that balanced audio technology synergy that works really well with these speakers. Kudos to Mark. You saved me a lot of time, and I would say that that's where I would start when auditioning these types of speakers. You don't want an amplifier that's known to accentuate lower bass registers. You want something that's going to focus more in the mid-range that plays to the strengths of the M30s, and boy, girl, it's all about that mid-range. It's all about the voice. Movie scores are awesome. Progressive rock, I'm glad I could start playing progressive rock again. I can't wait to really dive into the other XD line. My expectations are that they will be much more room friendly. Tune in to find out. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and your patience. This is going to be fun, and I would say that enjoy your music. Don't get too excited about the owners of companies. Don't get too excited about their philosophies. Yes, ultimately, they're the ones designing certain products, but like Hollywood, if you get caught up in what their opinions are, you're going to find that there's things you don't want to do, things you don't want to purchase, things you don't want to experience because of their attitudes. More on that later. Thank you for your time. Please tune in to the next 3 episodes.